Okay, let's get started. My name is Stephen Palmer. I'm a lead engineer at the Unity Austin office. Talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I'm here to talk about the future of asset bundles. But real quick, I thought I would kind of give a really brief overview of what asset bundles are in case anybody's here that isn't really familiar with this. So asset bundles are basically just a container for objects, much like a zip file. They contain platform-specific runtime data. So you build asset bundles for every platform you want to distribute for. We can express dependencies between bundles. So assets in one bundle can load assets from other bundles, and they understand this relationship. They have compression options, so they can be uncompressed, or you can use LZMA compression, which is a pretty optimal compression if you're compressing a lot of data. So LZMA compresses the entire bundle. And then LZ4 compression is we call it chunk-based compression type. So it can decompress in a small amount of memory, specifically what you want. There's two basic types of asset bundles. There's scene bundles, and then there's the other kind that just basically have loose assets. They use them both pretty much the same way, but they have a little bit of differences. I highly recommend, before you get started with asset bundles, to take a look at this asset bundle and resource guide. If you read one thing about asset bundles to get started, that's the document to read. It will give you a very detailed overview of, first of all, how Unity manages assets in memory, how it loads assets, and how that relates to asset bundles and how asset bundles work. And I guess I should mention that asset bundles are not Unity packages. They're not the same thing that you use to publish to the asset store. So if you're here and you thought that was what we're talking about, I'm sorry, we're not. So why do you use asset bundles? Well, there's a few use cases. I think the most common thing you want to use asset bundles for is to minimize your initial app install size. So you basically want to take all of your assets out of your game and put them into asset bundles, so your initial installation is as small as possible, so you get the most downloads, and stay under that over-the-air download limit that exists. Another reason to use them is for seamless incremental content updates. So you can deliver new asset bundles to your games that are already deployed with new content, and generally as long as it's built with the same version of Unity and you use the same types, code types that exist in the running players, then you can deliver new content. You can also use them to more precisely manage runtime memory. So you can load all of the assets loaded from an asset bundle. You can unload them all at once using our APIs. Another reason is to deliver and load content selectively based on device profiles. So you may want to deliver certain types of content to certain devices based on how much memory they have, how fast their processors are, that sort of thing. So you can have multiple different asset bundles that represent the same assets in game, but you can just choose to load that based on how the device is. And lastly, an important thing about asset bundles is that you can improve your build times quite a bit because asset bundles builds are cached. So when you rebuild asset bundles, we only rebuild stuff that has changed. So if you have most of your content separated into asset bundles, then and you only make small content changes, then those build times for asset bundles will be very quick. So that's kind of just a basic overview. I know some of you in here are experts on asset bundles, and I really want to talk to mainly in this talk, I want to talk to people that have been using asset bundles for a little while or are kind of familiar with the system. And if you have been, I think you understand that there are some problems. And I kind of want to go over some of the problems that we've heard from you and that we know about. and tell you what we're going to do about it. So what are some things that suck about asset bundles? Well, first of all, the documentation is confusing, inconsistent, and scattered. I know this. I went to try to look at our documentation recently, and it's very hard to know where to start. So that's why I wanted to show you that first document, because I want everybody to start there. We have some built-in APIs that are too low level. To actually use AssetBundles to deliver content to your game, you have to build a lot of code on top of it to manage downloads and loading the assets from the bundles and handling unloading. So there's just a lot of scaffolding that you have to build. So they're a little bit difficult to get started with. But also our built-in APIs are too high level because you don't have enough control of building and caching and loading. So we've kind of got the opposite problem for some of you that really want to really have control of the system, and that you're missing the APIs you need. Editor tooling is non-existent. So basically, the only thing you see in the editor about asset bundles is a little thing that lets you tell an asset which asset bundle it should belong to. So that quickly, it doesn't scale very well, and you quickly kind of, you wish you had some better tools in the editor. More things that suck. Asset load performance is inconsistent across platforms. So we know this, that there's some, there are load time problems with asset bundles. There's a system to manage variance. I talked a little bit earlier about loading different content based on device profiles. We have this thing called a variant, where you can basically create two different copies of an asset, and those can become variants. And then at runtime, you would load the one that you choose based on the variant. The problem with this is that you guys don't actually want to manage like 2 or 3 or 4 sets of the same exact content. So anybody that's using asset bundles doesn't actually use the variant system because it just doesn't scale. Another problem we have is that shader variants and other stripping operations don't actually work correctly. And I have if you get the slide deck later, I have a link to a public bug report that demonstrates this problem. But this is a big problem if you have shader variants. If at build time, basically the material doesn't know about the shader variants you're using because they're in asset bundles. So we want to fix that. And then finally, like the sample projects and code that we give you to help you get started with asset bundles are actually very simplistic and aren't really representative of like good production scale games that you guys are making. So if you've been using asset bundles, you might feel like this guy that recently posted on our blogs, which was, I'm just being honest. But look, this was a little hyperbolic, but I like that quote. But I'm here to tell you, so we have a new asset bundle team. We're building a new team in Austin, Texas, specifically around build pipeline and asset bundles. Unity has recognized that while this system is important, it's a really important part of our ecosystem. It needs some attention, and so they're investing in building a new team. So what are we going to be doing? So our team's focus is on, first of all, technical debt and bug fixing. There's a lot of known issues, so that's one of our things. We're going to be doing editor tooling. We're going to be making some nice tools in the editor for you to manage asset bundles, to see what's in an asset bundle, to manipulate asset bundles, that sort of thing. We're going to be like completely overhauling the build pipeline. And I'll show you a little bit of code later that kind of shows you where we're headed with that. And the reason we're doing this is that a lot of the problems that I mentioned earlier are really rooted in how the build process is put together and how the APIs are exposed. And then we're going to provide some new runtime APIs for loading and unloading assets. So we're going to basically out of the box give you some really cool abilities to just automatically use assets from asset bundles. We're going to have some hot reloading features. We're going to help you manage your memory better using asset bundles. So all of this is going to be built on top of our a new build pipeline. And finally, we're going to update the documentation and sample projects to be more clearer and to be more representative of the kinds of projects you guys are working on. So here's some of the guiding principles for our team. So first of all, we're going to work on building block APIs. When we make a low-level API, that is an API that's built into Unity, that ships with Unity, they're going to be very specific, optimized, and well-tested and stable, and they're going to be also exposed to C#. But they're going to be very limited. The high-level APIs we create that build on top of those are going to be very data-oriented, decoupled, and they're going to demonstrate best practices to you. You're going to be able to make changes to them because they're going to be open source, which I'm going to talk about next. But we're going to kind of have a reference implementation of everything we do. And then finally, like I said, we're going to allow customization at every level of the API stack. So besides, apart from the low-level APIs that we put into Unity, everything above that, you guys are going to be able to control and change as you need to. So secondly, we're going to open source our development. And you may have heard this a lot at this conference about this way of working. This is kind of a new trend in general, so we're going to be doing this too. All of our high-level APIs are going to be available on GitHub. We're going to try to be responsive to pull requests and bug reports in that system. We're going to get away from big monolithic releases, meaning you're not going to wait 6 to 8 months to see a complete feature. You're going to see it during development. And we'll have proper warnings like this might change and everything, but we want you to be able to kind of follow along with what we're doing because we want your input too. And then finally, we're going to have a very judicious creation of these low-level APIs. We're going to do that very selectively and minimally so you don't have to keep upgrading Unity to take advantage of new build pipeline features. Sometimes we're going to have to, but we'll try to do those early and do that as little as possible. Finally, the last guiding principle for my team is going to be to listen and serve you guys. We've already been doing a lot of this, developer outreach and interviews. I've talked to a lot of tech directors. I've been trying to really get close to your development process and understand the pain points. We're going to try to be active in forums and responsive to you guys. And finally, I'm looking at creating this kind of advisory council of trusted senior developers and tech directors. I've already talked to a couple people, and I'll talk more about this later. I don't want to go into a lot of detail now, but I just want to make sure that on a real regular basis, I have some people that I can that have committed to giving me feedback, and then we commit to using their feedback. So now I just want to talk a little bit about our roadmap, real high-level stuff for the next few quarters. So for the rest of the year, so first of all, we've been starting with a lot of discovery work, understanding what the problems are, customer interviews. We've already gotten started on some general bug fixing, particularly with our upcoming releases of 5.5 and 5.6. We're hoping by the end of the year we have a kind of a preview of the build pipeline overhaul. We've already gotten started on it. I'll show you a little bit of code later. But hopefully we'll have something usable and testable by the end of the year. We have a new tool called the AssetBundle browser that we're working on that you can just drop into the editor and you'll be able to basically see exactly how the asset bundles are laid out or going to be laid out when they're built. Finally, there's already released the AssetBundle graph tool, which you may have seen a blog post about this. And that Hiroki, our dev director in Japan, made this tool. I've already gotten some great feedback from some of you guys here at the conference that's going to be super helpful for you. So I'm glad that that's out there. So if you have any questions about that, please come talk to Hiroki about it. He's there. So next year. And I think of Q1 as like leading up to GDC of next year is kind of when we try to plan some new things. We'll obviously want to be much farther along with our build pipeline overhaul. That should be becoming pretty stable, and hopefully you guys can start using that. Likewise, the AssetBundle browser should be coming to completion. We hope to have some of our first load time performance improvements. These will probably be in either preview builds or beta builds by this time. But at least we'll be able to show some progress here. Want to have some initial cleanup on our docs. And so just to make them more accessible. And then hopefully we'll have at this time kind of a preview of the higher level APIs, some of those I mentioned before, that are going to be built on top. And these are going to have some features like hot reloading, where basically hot reloading means that and you'll build asset bundles in a way where basically most assets are in separate asset bundles. And then from the editor, as you make changes, asset bundles will be rebuilt automatically, and callbacks will be sent to either the player in the editor or to an attached device. And then the callbacks can then reload those assets however you want to, whether reloading a scene or replacing a texture or whatever you need to do. So the point of this is basically to get your iteration times down to basically nothing as artists are working in the editor. We're going to have a concept of addressable assets. And this is basically, we're going to be plugging into the resources.load and scene manager APIs that already exist, and are going to allow you to load specific assets from asset bundles that you've predefined either through a GUI or through code. So this really kind of merges our APIs around loading. And finally, when you start using these new APIs to load from asset bundles, that we can finally do ref counting against assets that are loaded from asset bundles, and we can help you manage your memory by automatically unloading asset bundles and all the assets that were in them when they're no longer being used. And then we're going to add simulation mode. We do have a project right now called the AssetBundle Manager, which some of you may have found and seen already. It has a simulation mode in it. It's actually pretty useful, so we're definitely going to carry that forward. And basically what simulation mode is, it just loads assets directly from disk instead of from asset bundles while you're working directly in the editor, just for convenience. And looking a little farther ahead, hopefully we're kind of done with our build pipeline overhaul, and we're just maintaining that. Likewise with the AssetBundle browser, hope to be much farther along with our high-level API. Hopefully we'll have some new sample projects at this time. We're also looking at, and this is not a promise, but one of the things we'd like to do is provide actually a server that you can deploy to host asset bundles. I'm not talking about a full Unity service yet, but mainly just the code that you can launch in your own data center or whatever to just turnkey host asset bundles. And then we're after we kind of get things in order in the current state, we're going to start to take a look at the actual asset bundle container format, and if there are ways we can optimize it and do that better. I don't want to be disruptive there yet, but we'll wait until we get some nice tooling around the existing container format, and then we'll look ahead and see how we can make that better. Let's see. So finally, so by this time or a little bit earlier next year, basically I hope to have all these things that I've talked about in a really nice state for you. So if we're looking at when is all this stuff we're talking about going to be done, this is kind of where I'm targeting. Another thing that we're doing obviously in the background is we're going to be taking care of our bugs, and we're going to really get our house in order there, so that by this time I'm hoping that we're actually addressing bugs more or less in real time, and we don't have a giant backlog to deal with. So that's kind of how our team's going to work, and some of the high-level stuff we're going to be working on. Just real quickly, I wanted to give you a look at some of the code we're writing. All right, so as I said, what we're doing is making this very data-oriented, staged, and if you're taking pictures of this might change, but it'll be on GitHub and you can see it. So basically, we start by generating the input for the build process. And this is very similar to the existing, it's called an AssetBundle build. It's a struct. You can create a list of these. You can feed it into the build pipeline. So it's very similar to that. The big difference is that we're using object GUIDs instead of names. So that's kind of the input. The input goes into a function that builds a command set. So the command set gathers all the dependencies for all the assets that you've put into input. It handles all the object stripping, and it generates just a giant list of objects to be written to the bundle. With the command set, we execute the command set, and this is where it actually is going to build the asset bundles. And then you're going to get out of that execution, you're going to get this nice output struct that you can do whatever you want with. You can serialize it. You can use it for whatever you want. But it's going to have all the details of what was written to the asset bundle, hashes of everything, et cetera. And so finally, yeah, so you would save that as, and we'll probably have a default, we'll save it to JSON or something, not sure yet. So that's like all the pieces, and then when you put it all together, you get something like this. That's your new build pipeline. And then you can, and like I said, you can customize it however you want to, which is why we did it this way. So that's basically all the talking I have to do. Good time for questions. Is there a microphone for questions? Oh. So come up here to the, yeah.
So my primary use for AssetBundles at the moment, at least, is as a better resources folder, basically something that can do name-based lookup, but also handle sprites properly. It would be really great if that were made really easy.
Yes, I agree. And I mentioned this briefly, but we are actually going to use the resources.load API. We're going to have hooks in there and interfaces that will just plug directly into the AssetBundle APIs, and you'll be able to use it pretty much exactly the same way. We'll probably add one around prefabs, where you would actually want to load and instantiate at the same time, so we might have something like resources.instantiate prefab, but it would be by name, and it would be just dead simple.
Yeah, and the other piece of that is incorporating the AssetBundles directly into the streaming assets as a default way of doing things. Yes.
Oh, and I forgot to put in the slides, but thank you for saying that. Another thing that's in the works right now is a rebuild of the cache system, the AssetBundle cache system. It's a new API, tons of control, and one of the things it does is it's going to treat streaming assets as a cache, as a layer 0 of the cache, and then you'll have indexes for more cache layers on top of that.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask that document you referenced on the first slide. Can you tell us where that's located?
Yeah, actually, I can probably pull it up for you. Well, I'm assuming that you'll have access to these slides after the show, so I did put the link in there. Let's see. Well, oh, it's not letting me click. If you go Google AssetBundle resource guide, you'll find it. It's one of the first hits in Google.
So you mentioned that variants are broken at the moment. Whereabouts in your roadmap do you think they'll be working, and how do you think they'll be supported?
Which ones? Variants?
Variants.
Okay, really good question. That's one of the areas we don't have a good answer for yet. We have some ideas. The leading idea in my mind is this concept of a virtual asset, which is basically just different kind of import settings for an existing asset. If we do it that way, it's really not an asset bundle issue per se. It can just be included in an asset bundle. So that's what I'm thinking now, but we don't have a solid plan for that. So that's one of my top things, is to work that into the roadmap.
With your new system, do you guys have a concept of maybe something like a lazy asset? So I can drag and drop, like, so I created this in my project. Mm-hmm. It's like a lazy sprite. I can drag and drop just like any other object, but under the hood, I save off the GUID and I save off the path and the asset bundle name. Mm-hmm. And then at load time, I can load an entire object with tons of these lazy assets, but then I call load on the ones I actually want.
Okay.
And then it works really well, but there's a lot of, I have to make sure that whenever I change an asset bundle, I have to resave out my object and make sure that all those references get cleaned up. So it'd be nice if it were built into Unity, like a lazy asset system.
I'm hoping that the way we do this, you'll find a way to do what you want to do with very little code, and it should work very nicely. It may make sense to have like a reference implementation of something like that. I'm not sure, but we'll see. And stay in touch and let's see how it goes. And then if what we build doesn't get where you need to go, then we'll we'll see what we can do.
Let's see, I apologize for this, but I'm new to AssetBundles.
Okay.
And you've pretty much described heaven and hell here. And so I hate to ask the ugly question, but what is the timeline for us getting to heaven?
Well, I tried to lay out as in much detail as I can safely do when we're going to get to heaven. I think the important point is we're not going to. I'm not telling you in 6 months it'll all be better immediately. I'm telling you we're going to be working on this incrementally, and our efforts are going to be open sourced, and so hopefully it gradually gets better. And then with your help, we actually gradually get toward the right conclusion, and instead of maybe waiting 6 months and having a conclusion that isn't correct for everybody.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
we'd be happy to help. Half my team is dedicated to assets. So.
Okay.
Another question. You guys, given I don't know a lot about assets, but is there going to be good support for command line? We can do a lot of work pre-processing stuff and feeding it through a command line tools and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I mean, all these APIs will be scriptable, and Unity already has really nice ways of running a command line in batch mode and executing scripts. So yeah, all of this should be possible in command
excellent.
line.
Thank you very much.
First question, regarding the new AssetBundle build API, is there going to be support for building assets that are in a different Unity project than the one you're working in right now? Something that we do for safety is separate out, for example, the art project that's creating a new art asset from the main game code.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The big problem with that is you're going to end up with GUID collisions because they're in different projects. I don't have a good answer for that right now. It actually came up this week, and we've discussed those sorts of things. But right now, really the best way, well, at least with the new the pipeline, you'll be able to take the data from those the build inputs, and you'll be able to manipulate the data precisely for the build process. And then you can then mash up your manifests, afterwards in a much easier way. But that isn't going to guarantee that it's going to work. So I don't have a good answer for that right now. We'll just have to think about it.
Second question, when we're working with bundles that have already been created that contain a bunch of assets, are you looking at creating some kind of tool to actually peep at what's inside a bundle that's already been created to confirm, to validate that it has everything set up correctly?
Yes, that's what the browser tool's for. Now, it's not actually reading the bits from the bundles themselves. It's taking all of the, it's basically looking at what the build process is about to do. And giving you all that. And then with this new pipeline, we'll have precisely all the data we need, so there's not going to be any difference.
Okay, so that's something that we could save off to then view after the fact.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. And then the third question, regarding streaming assets, this touches on what someone else mentioned earlier. Will there be support for getting rid of something that's in the streaming assets folder after the install happens if we've updated it and replaced it?
Probably not, because that's very platform specific.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's not much we can do about that.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I got one question about building like an asset bundle with a scene, like the Unity scene itself. Currently, right now, when you build an asset bundle with a scene, it doesn't hold all the information, such as sprite, like this, for example, the sorting layer, the layer names, and all those. Because when you try to load those asset bundles, sometimes they become unknown and their information get wiped out. So eventually, will you have a way of storing those type of information as well?
That sounds like a bug.
Oh.
Maybe. Yeah. Let's talk afterwards, and let's see if that's actually a bug or something we need to look at.
Okay. And the second question is loading asset bundles, sort of like in a background loading. So because some of the games we have is we're trying to cut down in loading time. So what we try to do is load things that are important to see first, while the rest of the stuff that can be loaded afterwards. So is there going to be a way to have something like that?
You can do that now.
Oh,
actually.
okay.
Yeah, use the Unity web request class. Instead of www APIs, use Unity web request, and you should be able to accomplish that. I mean, there is some performance costs there, but it's possible.
All right, and the last question is not the most popular one, but it's like scripts and asset bundles.
Yeah.
Now, the last time I read about how to do that, it was quite scary.
Yeah.
So I was actually wondering, in the near future, are you going to be like looking at that with a different approach?
We've talked about it. There's not currently a solution there. I mean, you can do it now as long as you're not running on a AOT platform like uses IL2 CPP, for instance. But on PC with Mono, you can pack DLLs into asset bundles as text assets and deserialize them and load them. So it's possible now, but it's not really officially supported and probably will not be a long-term solution. So yes, we talked about it, but we don't have a solution just now. So thank you for your time.